Pursuant to Section 841412 of the Nebraska statutes, the public is hereby informed that a current copy of the Nebraska Open Meetings Act is posted in the board meeting room on the north wall. The purpose of this workshop is for staff to provide information on projected receipts and expenditures for the 2018-19 and recommendations from the Budget Advisory Committee for reductions to approve. Roll call, please.
Cassidy,
Here.
Goding,
Present.
Hallman,
Here.
America,
Present.
Perlman, Ryan,
Present.
Scanlon,
Present.
Smith,
Here.
Snow.
Here.
8 present.
Mr. Perlman informed us that he would not be able to attend tonight's workshop due to a prior work conflict. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I think we're all on a little bit of pins and needles as we prepare for the results of our election tonight. I know we've had a lot of community advocates out over the last several months, really working hard for Omaha Public Schools, and I want to say thank you to all of them. I want to say thank you to the school board. Tonight is a pivotal night in the future, and by that I mean the long-term future of Omaha Public Schools. We know that in 2014, when we passed the Phase 1 bond issue, we told the voters we'd come back, and tonight is that opportunity. So again, I want to thank the school board. I want to thank all the community advocates that have been out there really working hard for our kids. And I just, again, want to say the need is so vivid when you go to a Castellar and see students in a little school, in a little house across from the school, or when you see 265 portables. So I'm hopeful, I'm anxious. In fact, I'm anxious for our workshop to be over so I can get in front of a television and see the results of what's going to happen for our young people in this great district. So again, thank you to the school board, thank you to the community. And now the next step is tonight, this is our first look with the school board at where we're at on our current budget situation. As the school board knows, and we're going to be going through some of the details of it, we've had a budget advisory committee that was inclusive of several board members. We're going to identify the other members in just a second on one of the slides. But we've been working since January to come up with some potential suggestions for our school board so that you had some input from multiple entities instead of just coming into the topic and into the challenge basically cold without having another group that had massaged it. I was clear to the budget advisory group before we came up with anything from them that it was simply a recommendation. It was never a definitive answer. They were to report to the school board and provide you input. And that input is just that, a recommendation. We recognize that as school board members, you've heard from constituents and you have your own thoughts in mind too. And so we appreciate that. And tonight I hope that we can help you with questions on where we're at and how we got to be where we're at today, and questions about how we can move through this process of budgeting in a tough budget time in a way that's least impactful to 52,000 young people. But recognizing that no matter what we do, when you do reductions, there are some impacts. And I know that many of you have been contacted by employees that we've shared with already, and part of that was because we knew we needed to, by state statute, with the April 15th deadline for certified employees, and part of it was because we wanted to let employees know that we thought could be impacted based on budget advisory, so they could also know that this is a potential. And so I know I personally have been in some very, very difficult conversations with some people who are deservedly upset because it wasn't their fault that we have some budget reductions, that the issues that are before us created challenges for us. So with that, I'd like to kind of walk through the slides, and I think Connie and I will kind of tag team on them and answer questions along the way. And again, I know this is a workshop and we're not here to actually ask you to vote on anything tonight. It's just to help answer your questions and to help provide the background of how we got to where we are today and some potential suggestions for the future. Connie?
Okay, President Snow asked that we provide you some information about the Budget Advisory Committee. You'll see in your handouts, you have a copy of the recommendation letter from the Budget Advisory Committee, and they also had some study items that they would like you to look at. But I thought I'd go through and tell you about how we started the Budget Advisory Committee and how we came to where we're at tonight. So in December of this year, we started putting together the committee, and we asked each of the board members to recommend two community members. We had union representatives from the OEA union with the teachers and the SEIU classified. We had board member representation, we had principal representatives, and then also members of the exec council. And then we had our first budget advisory meeting in January, on January 18th, 2018. And we started the process where we first explained how the OPS budget is developed. We talked about where the money comes from, how we spend the money, and we had, all the meetings were open to the public, and we had minutes and materials from each of the presentations that were posted on our website. So we tried to be real transparent as we moved through that process. Overall, we had 5 meetings with the Budget Advisory Committee, and that resulted in the May 3rd letter that you have where they made recommendations on items to reduce.
And just a note, as we work through it with, and you can see it's a fairly diverse body of people that were working through that. We prioritized, I want to say, 4 different times, including a spreadsheet that was sent home to all participants where they could prioritize on the spreadsheet. So their recommendations came after multiple opportunities to prioritize multiple areas. And I say to the board the same thing I said to the advisory group. If you were to ask me, would those be my recommendation? I would tell you unequivocally no. And I also would say, if you were to ask any one person of that budget advisory group, I think they'd say no as well. And so what you have is a consensus report from them that's really not reflective of any single person's opinion. And again, it's at least 3 or 4, Connie. How many prioritizations, counting the spreadsheet that went home? Did we do it 4 times?
4 times.
Yeah, I think it was 4 as well. So again, I just want to make that point that you might say, well, I talked to a budget advisory person who said that wasn't their priorities. That's probably true, because it's not any individual's priority. Certainly wasn't mine. If you were to ask me, I could do this fairly quickly, and I could tell you where I think it's best. But I also think that it wasn't my role to just sit down in a room with Connie and make decisions. I thought it was better to come to you with recommendations from a broad-based group, which is a similar process I've used in other districts as well. So
You'll also see in your handouts a complete list of items that were presented by the Budget Advisory Committee. They had 12 top priority things, and then there were items that were below the line that had some votes but didn't make it to the top, and then items suggested but not prioritized, just for your information as we go through this.
thanks for pointing that out, Connie, because I would share with the board, if there's something in there that the board wants to consider, we certainly can bring back to you any of the costs or cost savings from any of those items, and that's part of what the advisory group did. But you may see something you'd say, gosh, I'd like to know what would it save to do class size expansion, alternative high school, UNO middle school, whatever it might be. If you have some of those thoughts, oh, I see we did include the sheet with most of those on there, but you may have something else that's not on that sheet. Please let us know, and we'll get that to you.
Now, the reason we're asking you to meet today and meet sometime in May is that we're trying to develop the budget for 18-19. So we'll be adopting that this fall, and we need some guidance from you or direction on what items you want us to be considering for reductions. So our budget timeline, I just went from May through October, and in May, we have, of course, the bond election tonight, and then we have the workshop tonight, and then we have another one scheduled for the 31st. We have a board meeting on June 4th, and if you're able to come to consensus on what things you want us to be prioritizing when we're doing the budget reductions, that would be very helpful. We also have another meeting on the 18th if you're not able to do it by that time. But we have to have the budget developed in August. We will have a budget workshop on the actual budget development, but I don't know if you've seen some of our budget advisory meetings, but revenues and expenses are kind of a moving target at this point. We're always using the most up-to-date information that we have, but information comes in and we may have more revenue than we thought or less. An expense may come up like we had the last board meeting where the insurance went up more than what we had expected it to go. So those things will be happening throughout the process. So we plan to have a budget workshop in August. We do get our property value certified by the county on August 20th, and that's when we get a clearer picture of what our actual property tax collections will be. Then we also have to publish our budget hearing notice, adopt the budget, and then it's due to be filed with the state and the county and the Department of Education by September 20th. So this is our timeline, and this is why we're meeting now to try to get some guidance from you as we go forward.
And there's some other big pieces to that as well. Until the board takes action in June, whether that's June 4th or June 18th, remember we have approximately 90 positions, 95 positions that we have notified could potentially be reassigned to another role or could potentially not have a position based on what happens. So we have people that are in limbo right now wondering what's going to happen. And all I can tell them is we're taking recommendations to the board's going to take action in June, but they also need a time to digest the information. And so I want to be fair to the employees, and I also want to be fair, though, to the school board, because I know you need time to digest it as well. But the sooner we can have it, if we can do it by June 4th, then we can immediately work with HR to begin any of the reassignments and placements, because obviously our goal is to try to minimize the number of positions that are actually lost, where we don't have a position for them. We have, for example, 56, the majority of those cuts, over half of them are out of central office, 56 positions, from HR positions to business finance positions to CIS positions to operations positions, a total of 56 positions, which represents 18% of all central office staff. So we need to tell them as soon as we can on what we're going to do and where we're going to go, although to be quite honest, I have been candid because I don't want to sugarcoat where we're at. And so I've told those 56 people, and Mr. Wakefield as well, that there is a pretty good likelihood that that position as it is will not exist. And we'll look to find other positions for you if it's possible. If it's not, then it's not. So a couple of things that I will share beyond that. So that's kind of the personnel side that kind of tugs at my heart, because that's real people and that's real individuals impacted by these reductions. The other piece for the next year that I want to really emphasize for the board, we do not know what that property tax on August 20th is going to be. We know last year it went up by, I believe it's 4% assessed value. So we don't know. I think we're projecting right now, you're going to see in a later slide, 3% is what we put down because we're going to be a little conservative. We're hopeful it's much more than that. We do know that property valuations have been going up, and the city is definitely on an upswing, and we're seeing property values rise. So that's a really critical date that impacts the budget for 18-19. The other critical date is August 29th. On August 29th, we close out our budget, and so then we'll know how much we have for unencumbered cash reserve. Because we've taken some out of unencumbered cash reserve, you're going to see that in a later slide. We'll find out how much we can put back in on August 29th. Again, it impacts what we're going to have to do next year, or what you'll have to do next year, because there will be something. Because we do know the ARC, that is that additional payment on top of the matching payment that the district provides, we do know that it goes up next year no matter what, and we're gonna show you those numbers. And we did just get those reaffirmed by the actuarial person on, I wanna say May 4th or May 5th. We had a meeting with the actuarian, Pat Beckham, and we do know those numbers, so we're gonna show you those in a minute.
And I'm sure some of you have heard from employees who are a little nervous about what's going on. They're not sure of where their job is. We're also losing people that are leaving because they're uncertain about where they're gonna be. So we have really good staff that are, you know, the fluctuation and the unknown is nerve-wracking, so we wanna be mindful of that. Another thing you need to know is April 15th is the RIF date, so we've passed the April 15th date. So then that makes a difference on what we can do for reductions from this point forward. So those are all things you should consider as well. Mark was talking about the ARC payments. We paid, in 2017, we paid $12.5 million to the retirement. And, you know, really why we are here today basically is because of that. So as you can see, each year it grows. And it could be more than what's on here, or it could be less. It just depends on market returns. We do know the amount for 2018, as Mark said, that was certified. You know, we got that from the actuary. 2019, we're projecting 21.3, but it could go up just like before. For 2018, we were expecting 18.7, and then it went up. So those are things that, again, with the revenues and expenses always kind of moving target, those things can change, and they do have an impact on what we do with the budget.
The biggest impact right now is investment returns, and last year was a very good year. We had 10%, one of our better years in the last, 10 years. It's one of our better years. So if we can have some continued returns of double digit, then we're gonna be seeing these numbers slightly start to go down, based on what I heard from the actuarial person, 1st of May, Pat Beckham. So I think there's some hope there. All of those things obviously are dependent upon multiple things, including the market, but not just the market. There's other factors too where those dollars are invested. So that we had a 10%, and or just as a reminder, we moved down the assumption rate. It used to be 8%, and approximately a year ago we changed it to 7.5% because we just weren't meeting that 7.5%. It just wasn't happening. Investment returns were not there, so we turned it to 7.5%, which also increased the unfunded liability because we were moving the assumption rate down. But the good news is that 10% is 2.5% over our assumption rate. So if we have another year like that, I think we can start to see those numbers go the other way. So that's certainly our hope.
Okay, just to give you some background on how we determine where we're at or what we're gonna need for the next year. We looked at the budget that we had for 17-18, our property taxes, and our other receipts, our state aid, and all of those things, and I compared it to what we estimate it to be for 18-19. For the property tax, as Mark said earlier, we're estimating a 3% increase in assessed valuation. That could be higher or lower, and we'll know the actual amount on August 20th. So at this point, we think it's a conservative estimate. We're hoping it comes in at least at that, but if it came in higher, that would be great. So we may know a little bit more when we do a workshop in August, but this is where we're at for now. On the other local receipts, that's fines, licenses, motor vehicle tax, all of those things, and it's kind of hard to predict what that's gonna be, so I didn't really increase it that much. Hopefully it stays about the same. Our state aid was certified on March 1st this year, and it actually went down by about $13 million from what we had the year before. So in addition to the ARC payment, we have a reduction in state aid, and a number of things kind of snowballed, and it ended up where we are right now. So our total revenues, based on what we're seeing right now, I'm estimating for 18-19 it's going to be $594 million.
Just a comment on that. We did see a slight reduction in free and reduced, and I think that impacted us some. I think next year that number's gonna go up because our enrollment went up. This year, we were up almost 900 students, and our enrollment count is always a year in arrears. So we always have, next year's funding is based on this year's growth. And so this year's growth was higher, so I'm anticipating that going up. But as I say that, I also know legislatively, sometimes TIOSA can be tweaked by our legislative body. So it should go up with the enrollment growth, and I also believe we'll see, we did a few things differently with how we collected our free and reduced numbers that will change next year in a good way that should help us too.
Can you, the free and reduced, I just want to make sure I understand. The free and reduced will be greater, which causes more TIOSA.
Right, exactly.
So,
It
and
was
this
down,
year,
and we don't know why, but it was down. We don't have the
450, yeah.
we don't have the exact reason. We think part of it's related to CEP.
Right.
But it's hard to pinpoint exactly in the formula when you're turning it in, how it would have impacted, because that's a whole different reporting mechanism on how you do those was it 6 schools that were with CEP last year?
Yes, yeah.
and it's 1 year in arrears,
Yeah,
right?
and we,
Yeah.
And I think, and I remember seeing that, the poverty number going to 76.5% or something on one of the reports from Casey. So that will be positive for us this fall or not?
That will be positive.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
And
what
really, it's the free number, not the reduced number. That free number is
Is
what
the
they
one that
look at.
matters,
And so
right.
when it goes up, we benefit. So yeah, I think you're gonna see that number go up.
So our fiscal issues for 18-19, we sat down as a team and we tried to figure out what are all the things that we have coming up that we know we have to address. So all of the things in the red are items that we already know we're gonna have to deal with for the budget for 18-19. The ones that are unknown and that you may consider as you're looking at budget reductions is the textbook adoption, and then also the salary increase for other bargaining units. We haven't settled with all of the bargaining units yet, so that's something we could look at as a possible reduction. And then the textbook adoption may be something you want to consider also. The Budget Advisory Committee did look at that as well, and there was a lot of discussion going back and forth on all of that, so.
Right, and I think the other bargaining units, I think that's something that the board can consider too on what we do, whether or not the board freezes or how much they do, because we put $2 million into it, but that's still contingent upon the negotiations on that $2 million.
So when you look at this, the increases that we're anticipating, of course, there's gonna be more or less, as we go forward, as we're developing and figuring out where we're at. But it looks like our expenditures are gonna increase by $38.3 million if all of these should come to pass. And we know the red ones do, so the only ones that may change would be the textbook adoption or the other bargaining units when they negotiate their salaries. So that's where we're at with the expenditures. So the estimated revenues, I showed you that earlier. I'm estimating the revenues are gonna be $594 million. We're estimating our expenditures are gonna increase by $38.3 million, so that's gonna leave us with a budget shortfall of approximately $51 million. So we know that our contracted transportation costs, we're having some savings in that this year. So we're estimating that those savings are gonna be $2.5 million. We reduced that $50 million budget shortfall by $2.5 million. And then we are, the Budget Advisory Committee recommended using a portion of our unrestricted funds to pay for part of this budget shortfall so that you wouldn't have to do a $50 million reduction in 1 year, that you could kind of spread it out over time, because as you saw with our ARC payments, those are ongoing, and that's something that we're gonna be dealing with for some time to come.
And again, that slide shows 38 million on expected increases. That's if you did raises for all employees next year. That's if you did $7 million in textbooks. That's what makes that number different. The unrestricted fund balance, again, that's the number you're gonna look for in August when we close out the budget, how much you can put back in to that fund, because you're taking some out of the fund. How much can we replenish it? We won't know till we close out the budget books. But it's likely to be double digits based on previous years, and part of it's impacted by budgeted positions that went unfilled. Part of it's impacted by utilities and whether it's gas or electric, if it went up or down. And some of those numbers are very hard to predict on this size of a budget till you close the books out.
So to talk a little bit about the unassigned fund balance, there is a board policy 3011 that indicates that the unassigned fund balance has to be between 10% and 20% of the prior year's expenditures for the general fund. And the purpose of this unassigned fund balance, it's like your savings account at home. You know, you always want to keep a little bit extra in case something unexpected happens. And it helps us maintain our cash flow because we draw, our taxes are submitted to the district 2 times a year, so we have to kind of spread that out and make it last for the whole 12 months. It helps us with our cash flow, maintains our investment bond ratings, and it offsets revenue shortfalls and provides money for unforeseen expenditures, because we always, as a district as large as this, you always have things that you hadn't anticipated happen. But if the fund balance is too low, it hurts the cash flow. That's why you have a policy of keeping that between 10 and 20%. So when we finished our year last year, we had an unrestricted fund balance of $103 million. And that's 18.47% of our expenditures for 16-17. But from that amount, we had to use $9.4 million to balance last year's budget. And then we needed some cash to make the ARC payment. The ARC payment was the $18.9 million, so we have $11.9 that we had to use our fund balance for. $7 million of it we had already budgeted for. We thought that was going to be the ARC payment, but then it, you know, so it's a moving target that way. So that brings our fund balance from $103 million down to $82 million, and then the Budget Advisory Committee recommended using some of that cash balance to balance the 18-19 year budget. So that would leave us with $60 million, unless we have revenues that come in at the end of this year that are higher than we expect, or, you know, it just depends what happens. But if we go down to $60 million in our fund balance, that would be within your policy of 10 to 20%, but we can't go there again. That's a one-time place where you go to get additional revenues. So next year, when we have to make $21.3 million ARC payment, depending on what we're able to reduce in our expenditures, what we get in revenues, you know, that's gonna have an impact on our fund balance, and we have to be careful we don't go below the 10%, because that would violate your policy.
And again, that's that end of August number on
Yeah.
what, when we close the books out, what will you put back into that $60 million? That's a big day when we close books to figure that out. In the past, we have had some double-digit years. We've had some double-digit years, and 5 years ago, that fund balance was $44 million. So even at 60, it's $16 million more than it was 5 years ago, which I'm not, please don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting you go underneath that. I think it's a good policy. I think the board was wise in adopting that, and I believe that was adopted just in the last 5 years, wasn't it? Is that right? So
It used
so
to
I-
be between 5 and 15%.
Right.
And then when they did the bond rating, they looked at our funding policy, and that made us look stronger, that we have a stronger fund balance policy.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, we couldn't go back to what it was 5 years ago under policy anyway, which again, I'm not suggesting that's what you want to do. But that's kind of the history of that it was at 44 5 years ago, and it's been going up ever since. And now we're kind of dragging back down some, and we'll see in August how much we can put back in there to replenish it.
And, you know, we budget every year for expenditures, and sometimes people don't spend as much as is in their budget. So we're hoping that that happens again. I mean, the last couple years, we didn't spend as much as they had previously, so there was some cash left over, but you don't know from one year to the next, because if they have the budget authority, they certainly have the option to spend it, so.
Right, and that's unpredictable. You've got 90 schools with budgets, and you don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're doing end-of-the-year purchases, and sometimes they're not, and we've kind of asked them to be really as frugal as possible this year, because we'd like to see that fund balance really go up. And so we've asked our 90 schools to be considerate of that and really try to hone down as much as they can to increase that, and I know we've said the same to all departments as well.
If you look at this list, this is the top items that the Budget Advisory Committee had recommended. And I highlighted in red a few of the things that we wanted to address with you, specifically the Nathan Hale eliminate extended day, and the outsourcing of the secondary success. And the reason those are in red is because those would be part of negotiated agreements. And it may be something that we won't be able to do in 18-19, but would possibly be able to do in 19-20. So those are things that are subject to negotiation with the OEA. And then I highlighted the 5% reduction in all supplies, material, and equipment budget. When we did the reduction at central office, 53% of that reduction was in salaries and benefits, and then 47% of that was in discretionary supplies, materials, contracted services, and all of that. So, central office has already reduced as much as they could in those areas. So when you talk about reducing the supplies, materials, and equipment, there's nowhere else to go feasibly within central office because they've already had those cuts. But what we did look at is we looked at a 5% reduction in discretionary funding that the elementary schools get. We give every building $100 per student, and they use that as discretionary money to spend on whatever their buildings need. Sometimes they need a printer, or sometimes they need, different things during the year, so that gives them a little bit of flexibility each year. So what we did was a 5% reduction in elementary discretionary, and that came up to $122,645. And then we did a 10% reduction in discretionary for the secondary level, and that came up to be $240,000. And then we also looked at what we call off formula, and when we staff buildings, we staff them based on a formula of the number of kids in the building, the number of sections, and all of that. And off formula is for enrichment and things that are done on top of that. So off formula is supplies, art supplies, science supplies, things like that. So we were able to find $182,000 of that amount as well. So what we would, we came up with for this 5% reduction, instead of $1.5 million, would be $620,000 if we went to the buildings and had some reductions there. Wanted to, this is one of the slides that we showed to the Budget Advisory Committee, just to illustrate how the district spends money. And what we're talking about for budget reductions is our general fund, which is our operations fund. That's where most of our expenditures come out of. And you'll see that for the majority of what we spend our budget on is on the buildings. So 70% of what we spend is on, early childhood, regular instruction, summer school, special education, all of those things that directly impact students. So if you look at our budget, we're 85% people, because we are a people business. We're not, an investment type thing. We don't have investments or cash balances or anything like that. Whatever we collect, we spend on the kids, except for what we need to have on the fund balance to make it from one year to the next. So 9% or 9.3% of what we spend in the orange there is on buildings and grounds. That's custodians, custodial aid, utilities, those type of things. Transportation of all of our students, we spend about 6.58% on that. School administration is about 6%. That's building-based, your principal, assistant principal, the office, paras, dean, all of those things are considered administration for the schools. Then we have business support services, that's comp and ben, the accounting department, the budget department,
When did you get that?
the information management system, purchasing, all of the other things. And then the Board of Education is the smallest part, which is 1.84%. So just to give you kind of a flavor or an idea of what we're spending, and when you're looking at cuts, where you perhaps would look as you're thinking about all of these reductions that you have before you, so. And then Mark mentioned this earlier, on the central office reductions, 5.3 million of that reduction was from salaries and benefits. As Mark indicated, there are 309 FTE at central office that are paid for with the general fund, and 56 of those FTE were eliminated. So that represents 18% of the staff at TAC. So for every $1 million that you cut at central office, that's 16 more positions. So, you know, you may think that we don't want to touch the students in the buildings, let's go here. Well, you know, at some point, when you do that, like if there was a 12% cut or $12 million cut at central office instead of 10 million, that means 32 more people would lose their position. And then, you know, a $15 million reduction at central off means that 44% of staff at TAC would be eliminated. So those are things for you to consider as well as you're going through this. So that's kind of an overview of the Budget Advisory Committee, how we found ourselves where we are, and, you know, talking about what some of these reductions are that you want to talk about. So that's what I have for the slides. We do have some iPads that you can go through and make your selections on the items you want to reduce, and we would ask you to rank them from 1 being your top priority all the way down. And then we also have a place for you to change the amount, the dollar amount. If you decide you want to do 15 million at central office instead of 10, or whatever else you want to do, you have that ability to change it as well. We thought also we'd give you an opportunity to voice your concerns or ask questions before you start working on the spreadsheet.
Sure, and other things too, something to think about. In your handouts, we have a group of items to be studied that came from the Budget Advisory Committee, but we also would like to have, because there are some of these things that we probably can't get it all done by the timeline we've got in front of us. There's some research that needs to be done. So we'd love to have some of those items so the board can look at things more in-depthly as they look at some of the challenges for 18-19 and 19-20 school years. So please take a look at those items considered for board study, and if you'd like to add some other things, that would be helpful as we prepare for the fall and some of the things to study and bring back more detailed information. I can also tell you that we're working with an entity that's going to load all of our expenses for any vendor that we use, for example. And it's actually a company that does it for hospitals, and because the owners of the company have children in OPS, they're going to provide this service for free, which I think is going to give you a nice breakdown of all of our contracted services and all of our purchasing, whether that's purchasing for pencils, paper, or green beans. It doesn't matter. We're going to have a pretty detailed piece, and it's just something that we thought would be helpful next fall to give you a more detailed look at a multiplicity of vendors and services that are provided so that you can make decisions with a little more information.
We're compiling that information now, and we're going to give them 3 years worth of data, so they'll have a lot of information they can look at, and that'll help you when you're looking at things in the future. The thing to keep in mind here is that we have to make reductions right now, but we'll be back here again doing it again next year. So it's not like, you miss your chance on doing something this year. There's plenty of things, and that's why the study items are important, because if there's something that you think needs further study, we're happy to do that, and we'll be able to provide that for you.
Thank you. Mark Evans and Connie Kanoki and everyone that helped put this together. Real quick, if everyone could pull out their list of items presented by the Budget Advisory Committee, I want to go over a couple numbers and have district staff explain the possibility and their explanation. Vice President America and I got together and we went through these numbers from the Budget Advisory Committee. And for an example, their recommendation was to eliminate textbook adoption by $7 million, reduce reassigned school support liaisons by 2.5, and there's another number down here, I believe, 5% reduction in reduce the paraprofessionals. So reduce 100%, 100 vacant paraprofessionals positions out of the 1,300 and reallocate. So I have Charles Wakefield and Melissa Comine, and if Charles, you could start, actually Melissa, if you can start and explain we decided to just cut everything in half on those numbers there, and Melissa, could you explain the possibility of doing half of the textbook adoption now and the other half potentially in the school year of 1920?
Absolutely. I also brought a document that outlines what we will do if we do not receive a textbook adoption, so we can talk about both. It is my understanding that the $3.5 million would basically be reserved, so the following year it could potentially be added to do a textbook adoption. And so what you have coming around now, it's not an in-depth of our entire English language arts program at K-5, but it does let you know at the very beginning that we do a balanced literacy approach, and balanced literacy contains the 5 components of reading. So we ensure that every student every day receives an evidence-based program in the area of literacy. We also shared some of our core beliefs, but then if you get down to the section that talks about the English language arts curriculum, it is a reminder that in 2014, the college and career ready standards were adopted and put into place within the Omaha Public Schools. At that time, we did create pacing guides to align with our current adoption to support our teachers in those college and career ready standards. And then this past summer, we also updated the A+ curriculum guide, which created more resources for our teachers to help with the alignment of the college and career ready standards. But as we move forward, our adoption is not completely aligned, even with the different resources that we have provided our teachers, and we understand that, so we have already begun making plans if we do not have a textbook adoption to help our teachers over that hump so that our students can continue to thrive in the classroom in the area of literacy. And so you will see that at the bottom there are 2 boxes. On the left side, it outlines a variety of professional development opportunities that we have planned for the 18-19 school year, and then also some resources that are provided. And so some of the professional development opportunities are helping our teachers understand that the college and career ready standards are not just more rigorous for our students to learn, they're also more rigorous for our teachers to learn how to teach. And so that creates an instructional shift, and the professional development will help our teachers understand the instructional shifts. So one strategy is called the closed reading strategy. And we would like our teachers to utilize a closed reading strategy in their whole group instruction, which is on grade level instruction. And closed reading goes beyond that comprehension, where in the past, a student would be asked to read a passage and answer some questions. Closed reading would require the student to continually reread that passage over and over for a deeper meaning and be able to apply what they've learned at a much higher level. And so that's an example of the professional development that would be offered. You can also see that interactive read-alouds are part of that, and then additional professional development opportunities.
Thank you. And also on that list is centralized elementary summer school. The board officers, we moved it to $1.5 million. Could you explain where the current summer school budget is and how that 1.5 reduction will fit in there?
So the current elementary summer school budget is around $4 million, and the current secondary budget is around $1.7 million. Eliminating summer school is a little bit more difficult for a variety of reasons. When you take a look at the way the dollars are allocated, it's mainly to pay for staff, which majority of that are the teachers teaching the students, and then also for transportation. And state statute does require certain allocations. For example, you have to have a 15-to-1 student-teacher ratio. If you have up to 20 students or more, you have to have a full-time paraprofessional. So that's an example of one of the compliance things that we have to do. The other piece is summer school is reimbursable according to state statute. If you have questions about that, Connie is probably the best person to ask about that, but that is something to take into consideration. As far as a 1.5 million, I have to be honest with you, I don't know where we would find it. A lot of people keep asking, how can we centralize summer school? What we have found is as we continue to centralize, transportation costs go up. So for example, the 5-year trend, 5 years ago, we had summer school in 62 sites, and this year we have it in 46 sites. We have only saved approximately $50,000 and have had a reduction of almost 1,900 students attending.
Thank you. Charles, could you explain the reduced 100 vacant para positions out of the 1,300, where we came up with that
Yeah.
2 million? And it's positions that aren't filled currently in the district.
That is correct. Combining both part-time and full-time paras, we have just under 1,300 para positions. We currently have just over 100 vacant as of next year. This is the time when we tend to get retirements and resignations from our paras. If we downsize those 100 positions using average salary for paras, that would net us just over $2 million. Not cause us to cut any additional staff. The backfill on that, what we'd have to go and do after that, though, is reallocate those resources across the district, because our paras aren't resigning from where we necessarily would reduce paras from, and aren't resigning from all buildings at the same rate. So we may have 3 paras retire from one building and none at another, and we'd have to do some adjusting with staff to make sure we meet student and building needs at that point.
Thank you. And on this list, I forgot to bring up Lisa Utterback. Lisa, could you, come up and explain we took the 2.5 million recommendation from the Budget Advisory Committee and moved it down to the 1.5. Could you just explain that email that you sent the board officers about
Yes,
the possibility of still having SSLs with the
yes.
reduction in that?
We had the opportunity to meet and really prioritize the needs of our schools. And in looking at pulling out full-time school support liaisons from our REACH schools would absolutely be devastating. And so in order to really sustain that system of support, we had to make a decision with regards to looking at some different things with those assistant principals. And we feel that that would allow us to continue to support our REACH schools and help move the work that we've started several years ago. The flip side of it is, if we could figure out a way to focus on getting 18 school support liaisons opposed to the recommendation that you had, and allow that system of support for those assistant principals, we think that we would be in a win-win situation considering where we're at.
Thank you. So thank you, 3. Real quick. And then also at the bottom, the shutdown of central office for 1 week. We put that down there, and we forgot to consult with our in-house counsel, and that also has to be negotiated as well. So the items that need further study that Connie mentioned before, eliminate, extend school year at Nathan Hell, outsource secondary success, and shut down a central office. That's not study, that's just, we would have to negotiate, and those bargaining units will have to agree before. And then we do not want to really put those on the list for us to say that we can do it if the bargaining units aren't interested in having that conversation at this time. So, with that, does anybody have any questions before we move on? Mrs. Goding.
So I feel like, well, first of all, I guess I have a question for Connie, and that is on slide 9. If we go back there, I think that, I just want to make sure that's really a projection of cash balance and not what it is, because we're projecting August 31st of 2018, right? Because you were looking at beginning balance.
I'm looking at August 31st, 2018.
So is that 200 or 2017 unrestricted fund balance, is that accrual or is that cash basis? Do we know if that came from the audit or did it come from?
That came from the audit.
Okay. So I guess the thing is, we never know on the audit side until really about October, November.
Right, and then, like Mark said, you know, if there's funds left over at the end of the year, that would help increase our unassigned fund balance too.
Right. We just don't know that
Yes,
until
we
we get
don't
to
know that.
October, November.
Right.
It doesn't really happen at the end of August. It happens at the end of August from a cash balance position, but not from an accrual, which is what the audit will be on and what certainly the bond rating agency would look at. So in listening to all of you and in listening to the conversation of some of these detailed things, for me, it doesn't come down to so much picking items. For me, it comes down to kind of an overarching guidelines of what the administration should bring back to us as a board. And so, for instance, I think about just guiding principles of what does our strategic plan say that we should be doing to get to where we want to go, and what is the best choice of the worst items to not take us out of alignment with the strategic plan. And it's really the administration that can, as you just clarified a number of things, we don't know all those details and all the pieces of it, but I think about things like, for me, curriculum is really important. And even though we say delay from the 18-19 budget, what it means is you wouldn't purchase it till 19-20. So it means that curriculum would not go into place until the fall of 20 for the vast majority of teachers. You've got high flyers that could probably start implementing in 19-20 if, you know, as the purchase came in. But from a pure training standpoint and everything else, you're really delaying those items. And as you mentioned, the closed reading is really where we're seeing the test, I think, and that's one of the challenges our kiddos are having on these tests is we just don't have the curriculum available for what they need to do. So for me, that's a challenge because strategically we say every student every day prepared, not every student in 2020 prepared for school. And that's, for me, that's what that item does. I also think that from the reserve ratio, so we looked at, so we're talking about 10% here. What we do know is that the bond rating agency last year when they reviewed us, or this past in the third tranche, they saw that at that point in time we had a 25% reserve ratio, and they were very impressed with that because of where our unfunded sits on the balance sheet, and that's a concern. They really, in the budget advisory, or in the budget committee, the board members with the budget committee, what we know is that they'd like to see us be between 18 and 20%. If the bond passes tonight, which we all hope it does, right, then we need to be at the 18 to 20% because that has a significant impact on the taxpayer from whether or not we get the rating we need and whether or not the taxpayer ends up having to pay more in taxes because the interest rate goes up. And so, you know, those issues become really significant from if we're going to be efficient with the use of our resources, we should also be efficient with the use of our taxpayer resources and thinking about that 18 to 20%. You know, the negative side of that is if, you know, and I really believe the bond will pass tonight, so I really believe we need to be at that 18 to 20% from the bond rating agency. We know that on our balance sheet this fall, we'll probably pick up close to another 100 million-ish of unfunded liability that wasn't there on last year. So when the bond rating agency goes to look at that, they're going to see that extra 100 million. They're going to want to make sure that our rating and our reserve is where it needs to be. So that's the second item that I have. Third item that I've got is really just asking staff, as you all just mentioned, to figure out right sizing, as Mr. Evans just mentioned, figuring out what is appropriate from a percentage-wise of spending. But you had one line item up there of coming back into the general fund, but we know that that particular department for us has 6 or 7 people. In other districts, it has 1 or 2 people. So I would ask that staff go back and figure out not a straight across the board, but what's right sizing in departments, and what does right sizing look like, and what are efficiencies and best practices to pick up. And then to really just think fourth about where is it best to outsource and where is it best to do it yourself. We should do what we do best on the teaching side, and then think about where we can get savings, because what we're going to do, this unfunded liability, the only thing we can control as a board is the unfunded liability. That's the only thing right now that we have any control over. The legislature hasn't given us much other opportunity. In order to bring that down, we have to bring down what that future liability sits at. And the only way to do that is to really think about staffing at its best and everything aligned in the best way that it can be aligned. Otherwise, we're leaving our children and our grandchildren with a significant challenge ahead of them. So I'm not sure what all the right things are, but I just think maybe for me, it's kind of this overarching, how do we follow the strategic plan? How do we use best practices? And for the administration to really come back and say, well, here, I think we can cut here, because we could come up with all kinds of numbers. I want to chop this much, or this much, but I don't know that I, as someone who's not sitting and looking at detail of the budget or any of the departments, can actually know how many SSLs there should be, how assistant principals should be realigned. And that's a challenge for me. But it's also a challenge for me to look at the unfunded and know that, that's a big challenge, because on August 31st, we're going to write a check for $18.7 million. That check gets written, or 18.9, sorry. We just would like it to be less. But on August 31st of 2019, we're going to write another check for somewhere close to $22 million. That can't come out of the budget. And so really what we're doing is we're trying to figure out how, we already know that 18.9 this year is really this year's budget. We got to be really protective of the unrestricted fund balance for next year. So I just hate to see us get into a place where, and like Mr. Evans said, we have no idea ever, because it can move 10 million, and on this budget, that's not really that much money in reality. So anyway, those are, I guess, just some of my thoughts of, from a board standpoint, what should we be looking at? Should we be down in the detail, or should we be saying, here's the things we'd like you to look at: outsourcing, saving the fund balance, protecting our strategic plan through providing curriculum for kids today, not a couple years from now. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Mrs. Godin. In your documents, there's a document that says Executive Council Budget Reduction Proposal. Mark, can you explain that? I think this is coming from the Executive Council of their suggested recommendations. I did not want this put on that slide because we wanted to take the recommendations from the district's Budget Advisory Committee that was created by Mr. Evans and focus on that. But there is this document from exec staff that talks about their suggested recommendations on there. Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to defer to Charles in just a second and just say, I think the thing that I heard from district leadership is trying to figure out kind of a little bit about some of the same things that Mrs. Goding just mentioned, concerns about SSLs, and elementary assistant principals, and how we could work that in a way that had the least impact on some of our schools that we particularly have put in some additional resources. Those REACH schools, those 10 or 11 schools that historically have been persistent low achieving by the state, and the state had identified them as such. And so they were trying to work as a body to come up with some other potentials that are still kind of within those parameters that were close to what the budget advisory had, close to what the board had, board officers had. And so I'm going to defer to Charles and Melissa and let Lisa also, all three of you kind of tag team, if you would, on how you develop that information with your colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Exec Council tried to stay within the parameters of the Budget Advisory Committee, looking at the things that had been suggested, but also really paying attention to the impact, both intended and unintended, of any budget reduction. Not gonna, unless you want me to talk about it line by line, I don't think I need to do that, but hit some key points with this. One of the big conversations we had was, how do we continue to support high-need schools at the elementary level? The budget reductions tended to be more heavily weighted at the elementary school, and that was a concern for us. And we recognize that number of students isn't the only factor that requires support. So does poverty level, so does ELL, English Language Learner level. So looking at some of those things and working through that. Exec Council discussed this and determined that an assistant principal provides better support than an SSL in doing that. And so looked at how we could, A, realign assistant principals at the elementary level to better support high-need schools. And then knowing that if we add something back into the budget, we got to take something out. So then looking at how we can realign SSLs to support the rest of schools so that we do that. So kind of looking at those balances and balancing those off, I would defer to Melissa or Lisa, who are both involved, if they want to add anything else on that. But really looking at how we can mitigate the impact at the school level while still hitting that $28 million budget cut line item that we need. The other big thing that we looked at was reassigning 50 FTE certified staff and build into classrooms. When we began to pull staff and look at who this would potentially impact, we had to begin to leave staff off. Staff to get variance because of their jobs, a dean, a curriculum specialist, a counselor, et cetera. We've already missed our statutory deadline of April 15th to provide a RIF or an amendment, so we had to start taking those staff out. Then we began looking at staff that actually teach part of their day as part of their building schedule, and removing them would have a bigger impact on that elementary or middle or high school schedule. And we really got down to only 45 staff that we could really pull without having a major impact on a student in a classroom. And looking at those 45 staff, again, we were heavily weighted at the elementary and heavily weighted at secondary magnet facilitation. So we were really unintentionally targeting one or two things at the school level, and we didn't feel that was right at this time. What we are suggesting is that we bring that back next year, because we do have staff who don't have classrooms and buildings that we can look at. But we want to take a more strategic approach to that, so we can look at things, including staff that have variances that we may have to provide a RIF notice to, or looking at equitable, not equal, but equitable allocation of resources based on need, and felt like we needed a little bit more time to do that, and felt that would be better done next year. Melissa, Lisa?
Real quick, Charles, who came up with the reassigned 50 FTE certified staff in the buildings to the classroom? Who selected those individuals?
That line item came from Budget Advisory Committee. It was well below the line. When it was prioritized at the May 3rd Budget Advisory Committee, HR pulled that list of staff and began looking at which staff we could touch, for lack of a better phrase, which staff we would interact with and address with that without having a major impact at schools.
But the committee didn't pick what section they came from, they just said 50.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
Okay. I just want to put that out there so nobody assumes that the committee was suggesting elementary school and magnet programs. I think that has to be clear, because no one's actually picking those individuals or departments. It is district staff.
Right.
So I completely just wanted to make sure that was known. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Mr. Scanlon.
Just got a couple of questions. I guess, does anybody remember off the top of their heads when those OSER alternative investments become available to get out of? Was that 3 years? Is that?
The last time that, when Connie and I visited, I think it's 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I think it's a little
It's
while.
not-
I'm looking back at Cecilia, but I don't think we can get out of them for quite a while. 5, 7, she's saying 7 years, okay. So, yeah, we're
Okay.
still in them for a while.
Okay, just question I had about that. And then, I guess, in looking at these recommendations, I agree with folks that, that have spoken that it should just be presented by the administration. I don't think that there should be a ranking. But I think that board members should weigh in on what they would support and what they would not support in order to give the administration direction. I think that my input, I think it all starts at the top, and that's with the superintendent, and $10 million in central office reduction. I believe that should be increased to $15 million. And as I've sat on this board, I guess since June 2013, there was a lot of things that were inherited for Superintendent Evans and the board. The fiscal culture of OPS, I thought was horrible. I mean, just ridiculous as far as somebody giving the answer to the board and the taxpayers. Well, we budgeted for it, but they never gave reasons of why they budgeted for it or what effects were going to, or what outcomes were going to become experienced because of that budgeting. I think it's improved. I think that, Connie, you've been here for a couple of years, and having sat on the budget committee, we've been cleaning up a lot of shortfalls that have been there for quite some time in OPS. And I think we are making strides, but we still have a lot of ground to make up. And I'm not convinced that we're there yet as far as having that correct financial culture. And I'll go back to a couple of years ago when it was brought to the board for social workers to come in to the buildings, and that was on a grant, and it was a needed thing, but it was just going to be thrown that, hey, $13 million is going to be thrown into OPS in, I believe it was 4 years, with no talk of how are we going to afford that. How do we make cuts to other programs in order to make those social workers affordable? So it's been very frustrating to just the bureaucracy and everything, that people just say, hey, we need it, and here's the cost. We have not been an organization that says, can we afford it? How are we going to afford it? And what outcomes are we expecting for these additional funds? So that's why I think that $15 million needs to come out of central office, needs to start at the top. The superintendent, whether it's the outgoing or the incoming, they need to come up with a plan how to streamline the finances of central administration. And that, in my opinion, keeps it as far away from the classrooms as possible. And on that note, as far away from the classrooms as possible, it upsets me that the elimination of elementary magnet schools has been presented. I feel that this is another shortfall that the district has, that we have some outstanding magnet elementary programs. We also have some that are not doing what they should be. And instead of an organization that says, hey, this school, elementary school X, your magnet program is not accomplishing what we want. But yet, a elementary school that, and I'll say it, everyone knows my kids are at Crestridge. It is a international studies magnet. It does fantastic, partnered with the dual language program. That school, elementary school, has 60 students opting into the district from outside of OPS. I would be very surprised if any other elementary school has that many students opting in from outside of OPS. We also have at Crestridge 188 students outside the home attendance area that attend that school. And yes, 66% are part of the dual language and international studies, but that leaves also 33%, or 33.5, whatever, that are opting in due to the fact that it is in international studies. That I found very interesting as I've been, as my children have been in that school for about 5 years now, how many international students that we do have, whether they come in for the med center or their parents are, we have a lot of Fortune 500 companies that have international families that come in. They look to Crestridge for that program. And this is where I think that OPS has to become a better organization, that you don't just look at, okay, hey, this isn't working at this school, so we should cut it across the district. That's bad, bad thinking, bad planning. We have things that work better in different areas of our district. We need to make sure that we focus on that and address situations where our shortcomings are addressed, but not programs eliminated across the board just because, hey, we think that, it's not working at these 3 schools. I would also support, again, starting at the top, a large reduction in the Board of Education's budget. I think that while it might be a small portion, it's very significant to show that the Board of Education is willing to make cuts, and a lot of those cuts, I believe, should eliminate board members' travel to conferences, and also within the district. Everybody says, well, we're just advancing and continuing our education. Well, I believe that, that's very good, but it doesn't mean we have to attend 16 conferences a year per person or per department. I think that really needs to be addressed. And I've mentioned the cutting TAC and central office. The summer school reduction, and I see that it's, let me double check, but I think it was, elementary summer school. Do we do middle school and high school summer school?
Yes, we do.
Why would we look at elementary summer school reduction as opposed to middle school and high school?
That was what was brought up at the Budget Advisory Committee meeting. My recommendation, if we look at summer school, would be K-12.
Okay, just because a lot of what I've heard is a lot of our shortfalls come on kids not being able to read by 3rd grade. And I'm guessing we make a lot of progress during elementary school for those kids, and then we're going to look to cut it. Just looks like shooting ourselves in the foot as far as, hey, let's get rid of the elementary, focus on middle school and high school, where maybe we've missed the bus on that. So I'd really, I'm not in support of reducing elementary, and I appreciate your numbers that you had for the amount that we've saved by reducing and just increasing busing. That seems, again, to be contrary to what's effective. We should be looking at that, not transporting our kids more, spending more on transporting our kids, but putting those dollars into the classroom and educating those students. So
Mr. Snow, I'd like to point out.
Mr. Scanlon.
I was Mr. Scanlon, I'm sorry. I would like to point out that we're the only school in Nebraska that has a full summer school program where there's a principal and we do a full summer school. So we have a lot of sites that do have summer school that, that was one thing that they looked at as possibly a reduction. But, obviously it's your decision what you want to do, but it may be a place you want to look at.
well, and it might. Oh, go ahead.
So I want to make a couple comments. Thank you on the elementary comments. I also think it's important to share that at the middle school, it's also remediation for reading, writing, and math. It also provides support with those transitions, which is part of AQUES, which is our accountability system. And then when you look at the high school, it's for credit recovery and for graduation. And so last year, we had 4,931 secondary students participate in summer school, and that also allowed an additional 196 students to graduate in the summer. So when we take a look at that K-12, we're looking at the different developmental and academic needs of that student, regardless of what age they are. And then also, I'm looking at a 5-year trend. In 2013-14, there was approximately $4.1 million allocated towards the elementary budget. We serviced around 8,000 students. Since that time, we have tried to reduce, or what people are calling centralize, but what we have found is the more we centralize or reduce sites, the cost of transportation goes up. And so we have saved approximately $50,000 in 5 years, but we have decreased approximately 1,900 students attending summer school and elementary.
And I think that just kind of adds to what we're talking about is the fact that paying more for transportation does not reflect on better achievements in the classroom for those students that need it because they're not in the classroom.
Right,
Because
less students have been attending. And so we need to do a better job of looking at efficiencies. And so one of the things our Department of Operational Services has said is they would meet with us to see if we could do different types of busing routes, maybe triple tiering or things like that. So we still need to look at some efficiencies.
Okay, and I understand that maybe we need to have a better message as far as not centralizing, but consolidating as far as, if you've got a Druid Hill and a Howard Kennedy that are, I guess, maybe a mile away, if that. In my neighborhood, Crestridge and Columbian are not that far away, that we can consolidate summer schools without increasing significant transportation costs. I think that needs to be looked at before we just say, hey, it's all going to be, this one location or these 3 locations throughout, and we're going to increase our busing by 50% or something like that.
I agree, yeah. We used to have 62 sites, and this year we'll have 46 sites. But you are correct, all of that needs to be looked at.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scanlon. Real quick, the eliminate elementary magnet allocations is not getting rid of elementary magnets, correct, Mrs. Kanoki? It's getting rid of the allocations they receive. Could you explain that 1.4?
Yes.
The extra money that they receive.
Yeah, part of it is discretionary, and then part of it is staffing. For the magnet programs, I believe there's 17.4 certificated staff, and then there's about 6 classified staff that are allocated for the elementary magnets, and then they get about $300,000 to $400,000 as discretionary money for the magnet. And you'll see in your handout, there was something that was prepared by the research department that talks about the magnets in elementaries, just for your information.
Thank you on that. And that's the,
So,
can you show
Mr.
them that document real quick? So they all know. Yes, Mrs. Comine.
And I just want to clarify, it's my understanding that if we eliminate elementary magnets, that it's discretionary staff as well as the programming. I mean, if you don't have staff and dollars, you can't offer a program.
Thank you. Mrs. Gadding, I believe you had your hand up.
So I just had a couple thoughts on high school, and part of it is just came up during lunch I was having with a number of my friends from different districts, and somehow we got to talking about high school, summer school, and I don't think we charge, correct? So every other school district charges for high school, summer school. It's part of, to pay credit recovery for it. So I don't know if there's optional things, because my kids did do summer school, not credit recovery, but took classes in the summer just to get things out of the way. So I'm not really sure if there's that option of if it's not credit recovery to charge, because obviously that's costing more for everybody to be there. The other thing that I look at in the elementary transportation is probably included is all the field trips. Is probably included in that transportation number, is that correct? Because I think they take field trips, once a week or so?
So students, or every student that attends summer school the school is allocated $25 per student. And then what curriculum instruction support does is we have $140,000 that we use to provide all the materials for summer school. So if you take a look at the $140,000 that curriculum instruction support offers, plus the discretionary students receive, which is $188,000. I'm not doing the math in my head here, but it's about $300,000 that we do. We do limit field trips to 2
Okay.
full days at the elementary, but in the past there had been more.
Yes, okay, that's what I thought, well, maybe that's a way to save some money. Okay.
Dr. Holman?
So thank you for, first of all, pointing out that the list was pretty elementary heavy. As I've said that from the very beginning, looking at the items that have been presented from the Budget Advisory Committee. I wanted to speak in regards to the SSL positions and even the elementary assistant principals positions. With the SSL positions, some of those individuals hold, as you all know, multi-roles within the building. Some of them are also the instructional facilitators in the building. Some of them are also the academic data reps in the building. And just thinking about those specific roles, with reducing them or completely eliminating them, that will definitely provide a huge void in the building. And although we're not saying it, they are essentially assistant principals without the title and without the pay. They are the people who are in charge when the building principal is not there. They are the people that do a ton of stuff on top of all the attendance that has been presented at our board meetings. These roles are very vital in our buildings, particularly in our elementary buildings. And so I would plead to you all to heavily consider moving those up to the top of the priority list, because they are very needed roles in keeping our buildings and maintaining our buildings, the success levels that they are. And obviously I understand that we cannot keep them all, but trying to keep as many as possible in our buildings are pertinent, and we need these people and these roles to continue with the success that we are hoping for with our students, because they affect the classroom, they affect the achievement, they affect the overall environment of our buildings, and particularly in our elementary buildings. So that's my spill on that, and so just think about that, please.
Thank you, Dr. Holman. And if I'm correct, I think you meant to say at the bottom of the priority
Yes,
list.
yes, sorry, yes.
Perfect. Ms. Merica?
I guess this may be a bring back for the next workshop. Just want to address a couple of things that Mr. Scanlon said. And Mr. Ray, I think you are the source of the font of information on this. No one on our board has taken 16 trips to conferences in a year. Our board has continuously, every year since the 2013 election, spent less on board travel than prior boards. And part of our board budget the last couple years has been the superintendent search, because all the fees associated with that came out of the school board budget line item. So maybe for our next workshop, could you bring back something showing what a potential budget would look like? Because yes, we do need to show that we're kicking in and being supportive as well, but we do also have a responsibility to be educated on what is going on in the realm of K-12 education. Most states mandate that board members attend trainings and workshops related to professional development for board members. Nebraska doesn't, but there's been legislation introduced pretty regularly to get that conversation going of should we start requiring this so that board members are taking an active role in their professional development. So that would be one of my requests for the 31st, is if you could just get us a breakdown of what the board budget has looked like over the years, what the usage has been, and then if there is something we can cut, since we will not be doing a superintendent search next year, what that could look like.
Thank you, Ms. Merica.
I'll speak too quickly, yeah.
Mrs. Cassidy?
We hope not, right, Lacey? She's under contract. Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody involved in this room that's done all the research on everything that's on this list in the Budget Advisory Committee. I have just a couple things on this list that kind of come to mind. First of all, I wanted to thank you, Mr. Wakefield, for your comments on taking a little bit more time to look at buildings. I've actually been trying to hit all of my schools just to speak with people in the buildings. I'm not in the buildings. I'm not in education. I'm not a teacher. I'm not a principal. How am I best going to know what should be cut from our district? I don't. I'm not going to pretend like I do. So I found it helpful just to kind of talk to my buildings. And I think one thing that I've just heard over and over from anyone in the buildings, whether it be a teacher, an assistant, is they want this to be more, they understand these cuts, they understand they're going to happen, but I've just heard over and over, please don't look at it black and white. Don't just look at seniority, look at performance, look at schools, look at need. Just because a school has 420 and they are under the threshold of 500, let's not say we don't need an assistant principal because we might have a school that has a strong need. English language learners, poverty, I mean, there's so many factors that come into each building that I think that at least what I've heard over the last couple weeks that I've tried to go in and actually talk to schools is please keep this in mind. I think the best quote I heard was, don't look at these cuts as X's and O's, but Johnny and Joe's, and try to actually talk to people in the buildings to say, you know, can you go without this person? What is your need? What's the culture of your school? Because I think a lot of the people in these buildings are so much more than just, it's not numbers to them, it's not numbers to any of us, but it's culture, it's morale. Some of these buildings have had a lot of things that, you know, maybe we aren't aware of, and taking a person here and putting another person here and shifting is going to really mess with their culture and their environment. So I think that I just wanted to kind of convey that buildings are really concerned about X's and O's and not looking at performance. Secondly, some of these things like that we have on here for later, I'm glad are on here. The summer school, I actually have had a couple principals mention to me charging for high school, and they've actually been high school principals. I don't know if that is something to reiterate what Ms. Godding said, which kind of took me aback, but a lot of the principals have said that I've talked to that at the high school level, it's more a crutch, if you will. Students might not work to pass a class because they know they can certainly do it in the summer. So I don't know if that's something to look at, but I do kind of, I mean, I've heard that, it's crazy how I've heard that a couple times reiterated. So that's something I would like looked at. This is just very tough. I think we all feel that, but hopefully, you know, we're tasked, we've got the task at hand to try to come up with the best solutions to all of these, what was the term, the best of the worst. So I hope that we can just work together and over the next few weeks, try to come up with the best solutions.
Thank you. Mrs. Comine?
I'll try to give you a little bit of information, and then maybe we can come back and give you more. We definitely could potentially look at charging students for summer school in our high schools or maybe secondary. It's important to remember our high free and reduced lunch rate. And also it's important, I think it'd be good to have an understanding of what state statute reimburses for summer school. There's certain different things in place where you can receive what they call units, and we have majority, if not all of those units. And when Connie and I took a look, and the reimbursement is a year in the rear, so that makes it difficult with the current situation we're in. And I think it'd probably be best to maybe come back and share how that reimbursement works, but it is considerable. So just want to put that out there.
One second. I'm sorry. Mrs. Nealis-Brash just informed me that we do have a policy about summer school, 5416, that says there shall be no fee charged for courses offered by the district in summer school for remediation, which is provided as defined in Nebraska state statute for students between the ages 6 to 15. Obviously, we can always change policy, but there is currently a policy forbidding charging for summer school. Ms. 5416. Board policy 5416.
Didn't you mention the state statute, though? And I think that was kind of my
Defined
point.
in Nebraska statute for students between 16 to 15, for which participation is recommended by the district.
Okay. And, right, but there's classes we offer that aren't remediation as well. So that was kind of to my point on that too. So, and I don't know how the reimbursement works. I'd love to understand that more, because knowing that other school districts charge, and I'm not so sure they don't charge on remediation, but I'm not sure how that works for state statute.
Mr. Scanlon?
I had a question on the curriculum updates. And I don't expect you to have the information today or tonight. I wanted to know, in the past, have we or do we have a way of tracking how curriculum updates relate or correlate to academic improvements? When we do a curriculum update, have we seen academic achievement improve that year or the next year and following? And have we been tracking it, and how do we track it? If you don't know that tonight, I'd like to know it for future meeting.
So just like the state of Nebraska has a standards revision cycle, state statute requires that we have to do a standards revision every 7 years in the 5 core content areas: reading, writing, math, science, and social studies. Then they also include other things like career and technical education, which is actually done more frequently, but it's not part of state statute. So what we do then is we design our curriculum development cycle based off of their standards revision process, because the state requires us, they give us 1 year to revise our standards after they adopt their new standards. And then after we revise our standards, we would typically move into a curriculum development cycle. As you're familiar with the different textbook adoptions, it's expensive, and so it is difficult to keep up with that. Just so you're aware of that, it is difficult for that. So if you were to take a look at the last ELA, I think the best way to take a look at what's the impact is, 1, the research, and 2, the results. When you take a look at the research, when you have students engaged in and teachers using aligned instructional materials, One of the most recent studies has been done by RAND Corporation, and they've been working with NDE. And what that has shown is that there's a 0.25 standard deviation, which equates for about 7 months of additional learning for our students. And so that's a little bit of the research piece. And then if you look at the past, our ELA scores have gone up steadily over the past few years. And so that would be the correlation that I would make with that past adoption. And then, of course, you'd have to look at the other subject areas to see what those test scores are as well.
And I guess maybe I just need a little bit more clarification. You know, we went how many years without updating our sex ed curriculum? And we've missed textbook adoptions, I believe. In the past, they've been put off for curriculum updates, but yet state statute requires us. So are there no penalties if we miss them? Or
So state statute requires a standards revision process. And with the standards revision process, what districts typically do is have a curriculum development cycle afterwards so that the materials that are purchased align to the standards that were adopted. The standards revision process is a requirement. The actual textbook adoption is not.
Okay, that helps clarify. So,
Sorry.
I mean, so does that mean that in certain subjects that we didn't do textbook adoptions or curriculum adoptions, the standards were updated, and that might have required us buying certain supplementary materials?
Yes, so a perfect example is the science. So the science team presented, I don't recall, in April. We did a standards revision process. It takes an entire year. We updated our standards, and then we took a look at what standards align, which standards do not. And the standards that did not align, we were able to just purchase some supplementary materials.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Godding.
Along with Matt's question, I think what I'd like to see you all present to us at the next workshop is the last update on curriculum for each of the 5 core content areas, what your proposed new update is when you would propose that we would bring in new curriculum, and then in a third column, what date that would be implemented. Because I think what delay of one will bump into something else, and then you're going to bump that down as well, because I think what we talked about in April was a 2-year delay in science, correct? Because we've added the supplemental, because we think we can get through with that.
So science, we are in the middle.
Different ages, though.
Right, so science, we're in the middle of an adoption cycle.
Right.
And so we were able just to update the materials to the new standards. And so the new standards and the cycle didn't match up very well.
Right, so I guess I'm just thinking about, and maybe add in there when the state's cycle revision is, because I think every 7 years. So I just want to make sure we don't get so far off. And when I came onto this board, we were way off on curriculum, I think, and we were just trying to get things updated. We got science done. We've done a few different things on reading, but I'm not really prepared tonight to rank anything, because I think there's more information I'd like to hear back from all of you in more detail. I'd like to understand the summer school reimbursement piece better. I'd like to understand where we're going to fall out in textbook adoption. On the textbook component, I would really like to hear what our new superintendent says about that, since she's a curriculum person. And what does Dr. Logan feel like is the best timing to get things done? When does she want to see textbooks adopted? And I think that's important for her to give us some input on that before I can tell you, yep, no. I just don't think I've got enough information yet.
Thank you, Mrs. Godding. I believe the executive council budget reduction is, you would say, a district recommendation, right, Mr. Evans? Yeah. Okay. I will go through 3 things that I would like us to do tonight before we leave. If you choose to not, I guess I get it, but I would really like us to start moving the needle. Our objective is to have these recommendations at the board table by June 4th or June 18th, so the district could move forward with staff that we currently have in limbo, that could be looking for other jobs or just not know, and that is not fair to them or the district staff or the Budget Advisory Committee that has been meeting since January. So we are going to go through ranking, and then if you would like to add things for the district to study, please write that down and give that to Mr. Ray, and he would add it to that list for items you would like the district to study moving forward. If there are items that are not on this list that you would like to see on this list on the May 31st, please write those items down as well, and those items will be added, and we would rank those items to see if we would add them to this current list. Mr. Dixon, can you explain? Mr. Scanlon.
As we go through this, I'd just like to remind board members and the district, everybody throws around the word equity. I think we have to understand as a board and as a district, equity does not mean identical. There's certain programs and certain resources that we need to have in different areas of our district, but we cannot just say that, everything has to be the same across the board for every different area of our school district. So I think that's very important as we start to talk about these budget reductions.
Thank you. Mr. Dixon?
So each of you have an iPad that's in front of you that has a spreadsheet, and in that spreadsheet you have two columns that I want you to take a look at. One is rank order. I have it highlighted here where my cursor is. Rank 1 to 15, basically in the rank of 1 being most important that you want to see cut first, and then 15 being at the bottom. And then under board recommendation, put the dollar amount that you would like to see there. If I scroll down to the bottom of the iPad, you'll see a place additional recommendations under this line. This is where we've identified if you have things not on this list that you would like to place. We'll gather those for input later. Anybody have any questions on that? I'm going to put the live graph up right now. I've noticed some of you have already inputted some things, so there'll be some figures already there. So this is an average of all of those columns.
And again, I would like to thank the staff for all of your hard work preparing for this workshop, as well as my colleagues for attending tonight. I understand this is very hard, and we take this very seriously, but we need to start moving as a district on making recommendations.
So there's a missing value there. I'll fix that. That's in one of the initial. Somebody put an asterisk in there.
Can you clarify with the red? What are the items in red? Are we supposed to do something different with those?
The items in, go
The
ahead.
items in red are items that were not on the list from the Budget Advisory Committee in their top list, but those were the next items almost right below the line. So we decided to give you guys enough flexibility to see if they line up. Maybe your items line up exactly with the Budget Advisory Committee. Maybe they line up exactly with the district recommendations. But as a board, and if we are in consensus on the 10 million, this will be the first time that we have actually seen some type of ranking or something for moving forward with that central office reduction. Mrs. Holman? Dr. Holman?
Question. With the outsourced secondary success program, I thought that was one that we couldn't touch anyway. So.
Yes, so the outsource of secondary success, you currently just don't put anything in there because we cannot control that. That is all dependent upon negotiations with OEA. and I believe the other two items aren't on that list. Okay. I apologize for that.
But do you want to know our rank on that, I guess? Or you don't?
I prefer not to have your rank on that, because if the district and OEA can't come to an agreement, there's no reason to rank that right now. If we have to make recommendations before, Mr. Evans would like recommendations by June 4th or June 18th. And also let me remind the board that these are the items that are, the highest items that are ranked will be the items that will be moved on to the May 31st board meeting, as well as the items that might not be on the list that you would like to see us rank on the May 31st. I just want to remind everybody on the board that this number up here is actually going to be drastically skewed. We were expecting every board member to put their numbers in, but if someone does not put their numbers in, we would have to redo the formula. So still put your numbers in, and Mr. Dixon will redo the formula so we can get the average for the May 31st. Yes. If anybody has additional items you would like to see on the May 31st agenda, you can email them to Mr. Ray. Mr. Ray? You ready? Let the record reflect the meeting was adjourned at 8:13. Thank you guys so much and have a wonderful night.